Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to tackle two ideas that totally flipped the script on how we read and analyze literature: formalism and new criticism. You know, if you've ever felt like there's got to be more to a poem than just trying to guess what the author was thinking, well, you're in the right place. This is all about making the words on the page the real star of the show.
Okay, let's just start with a simple question. When you sit down with a poem or any piece of writing, really, what is it that you're actually looking at? Are you thinking about the author's biography, the time period, maybe just how it makes you feel? Or is there something else? This very question, believe it or not, sparked a huge revolution in literary criticism.
For ages, right? When people talked about literature, they talked about, well, everything except the literature itself. You know, the author's messy life, what was happening in politics at the time, how the story made them feel. But then, in the early 20th century, some folks came along and asked a pretty wild question. What if all that stuff is just noise? What if the real magic, the only thing that actually matters, is right there in the words on the page? So let's trace this idea back to its roots. Our first stop is with a group of thinkers over in Russia who were trying to do something that sounds a little crazy. They wanted to create a science of literature. These groups, like the Moscow Linguistic Circle, were frankly fed up with the old ways. They didn't want to use a poem as an excuse to talk about history or psychology. They had a much more specific question. What makes this piece of writing literature in the first place? What's its literariness? What separates a great novel from, say, my grocery list? And they called their new science poetics. It's all about the how of literature, not necessarily the what. They were less interested in the moral of the story and way more interested in the nuts and bolts, the rhymes, the rhythm, the sounds of the words, all the devices the author used. For them, form wasn't just a pretty box to put the meaning in. The form was the meaning. Okay, now here is the absolute heart of formalism. It's a big word, defamiliarization. But honestly, the idea behind it is super simple. Think about your daily commute. You probably don't even notice the buildings you pass anymore, right? You're just on autopilot. Well, art's job, according to these guys, is to be a giant pattern interrupt. It takes something you see every day and makes it weird, makes it strange, so you're forced to snap out of that trance and actually look at it again. The famous formalist Victor Shklavsky said it best. He said the point of art is to make the stone stony. It's not about giving you a geology lesson on the stone. No, it's about using language in such a way that you experience its rough texture, its coldness, its weight, its stoniness, as if you've never encountered a stone before in your life.
So take a poem like this one. A formalist wouldn't care what the poet was feeling that morning, not at all. They would ask things like, how does the writer use the words, a tentative dawn that crawls, to make a sunrise, something we've all seen, feel totally new and bizarre? How did those specific word choices make this ordinary moment feel like art?
Now here's where it gets really interesting. At pretty much the same time, a similar idea was popping up in America. These folks became known as the new critics. And boy, did they take this text-first idea and turn it into a super strict, almost scientific method. For the new critics, a poem was like a verbal icon. That's their term. It's a perfect, self-sufficient little object. It just exists. It has nothing to do with the author who wrote it, or with you, the person reading it. Its meaning is locked inside of its structure, and the critic's job is to be a kind of surgeon and carefully unpack it. So to keep their analysis pure, they basically built two giant walls around the text. The first wall they called the intentional fallacy. This is the idea that it's a mistake, a fallacy, to think that what the author meant to do has any bearing on the final product. Who cares what they intended? The poem is what it is. It might have taken on a life of its own, and we can only analyze what's actually on the page.
And the second wall? That was the affective fallacy. This one's a little tougher for us to swallow sometimes. It's the error of confusing how a poem makes you feel with what the poem actually means. So just because a poem makes you cry, it doesn't mean the poem's meaning is sadness. Your feelings are your own business, they'd say. The poem's meaning is objective. It's baked right into the language.
So think about it. If you push the author's intentions to one side and you push the reader's feelings to the other, what's left in the middle? Just the text, the words, the sentences, the structure. And for the new critics, that was the only thing worth talking about, period. And this obsessive focus on the text gave us their greatest gift, something you have almost certainly done in an English class, the art of close reading. So how do you actually do it? Well, here's the basic toolkit. First, you put individual words under a microscope. What do they mean? What feelings do they suggest? Then you loom out and look at the bigger picture, the form, the rhyme scheme, the rhythm. Step 3 is the real detective work. You hunt for tensions, paradoxes, ironies, moments of ambiguity. And finally, the grand finale. You figure out how the poem takes all those clashing, tense pieces and somehow makes them work together in one unified, beautiful whole. So let's go back to our poem one last time and see how a new critic would tackle it. They wouldn't ask about the poet's breakfast. No, they'd ask questions like these. Questions you can only answer by looking at the text. What's going on with the words frail and grace together? How do words like crawl and quivering create a sense of tension? And always, that big final question. How does this all come together at the end?
Okay, so we've talked about these theories from 100 years ago. Why do they still matter? What's the big takeaway for us? Right here, right now.
I love this quote from Cleanth Brooks, one of the most famous new critics. He said, "A poem is a pattern of resolved stresses. It's not just a gush of emotion, it's a piece of architecture." Think of a beautiful stone arch. It stands up because of the tension, because of the opposing forces pushing against each other. For Brooks, a great poem works the exact same way. The tension is what gives it its strength and beauty. At the end of the day, the legacy of both formalism and new criticism is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly powerful. They taught us how to read carefully. They taught us to slow down and pay attention to the actual words on the page, to treat them with respect. Really, what they gave us was a whole new lens. Before them, a lot of analysis involved looking everywhere but the poem. These movements forced us to look inward, to see how a piece of literature is this incredible, self-contained universe that creates its own meaning through the push and pull of its own language. But it does leave us with a really fascinating question to chew on. Learning to focus on the text is an absolutely crucial skill for any reader, but is it really possible, or is it even a good idea to completely cut a work of art off from the human who made it, from the world it came out of, or from the very real emotions it makes us feel? That's something to think about the next time you get lost in a book.